Have you ever met someone who seems constantly dissatisfied, complains about everything, and yet acts as if the world owes them something? Someone who portrays themselves as a victim in every situation, but at the same time criticizes and devalues your achievements? If so, you may be dealing with a covert narcissist. Unlike the classic narcissist, full of charm and obvious arrogance, the covert narcissist is more subtle, and perhaps even more dangerous. They use victimization as a weapon, manipulate from the shadows, and leave you questioning your own sanity. In this video, I will show you 7 revealing signs of a covert narcissist that many people overlook until it's too late. Stay until the end because understanding these patterns can completely change how you view certain relationships in your life. Before we dive into these signs, we need to understand the concept of covert narcissism and how it differs from traditional narcissism. In recent years, researchers have begun to highlight that not all narcissists are extroverted, charming, or confident. There are those who exhibit more hidden characteristics, such as irritability, resentment, and social anxiety. These individuals are just as dangerous as grandiose narcissists, but their approach is different and often harder to identify. Covert narcissism, also known as vulnerable narcissism, represents a more recent evolution in the understanding of narcissistic behavior. This concept emerged around 20 to 25 years ago, when researchers began to realize that the traditional model of narcissism, associated with charm, confidence, and obvious grandiosity, did not capture the full complexity of the phenomenon. There are people whose narcissism manifests in a completely different way, through vulnerability, irritability, and even apparent insecurity. These are the covert narcissists. While the classic narcissist is extroverted, charismatic, and often displays an air of direct superiority, the covert narcissist is more reserved and melancholic. They may appear anxious, socially awkward, or even depressed. However, these traits mask a core of arrogance, entitlement, and constant need for validation. The difference lies in how this grandiosity manifests. While the grandiose narcissist shouts their superiority to the world, the covert narcissist whispers their claims of greatness through indirect comments and self-pity. For example, instead of directly stating, "I am amazing," the covert narcissist might say something like, "I could have been the best in my field, but no one ever gave me a chance." This victim narrative is central to their behavior. They often attribute their failures to bad luck, external injustices, or the actions of others, while minimizing the efforts of those around them. To them, the success of others is not the result of hard work, but rather privilege or luck. Another striking trait is the use of passive aggressiveness as a control tool. They rarely confront directly, preferring to make sarcastic remarks or veiled criticisms. Phrases like, "It must be nice to have so much free time," or "Do you really think this is going to work?" are typical. These statements hurt, without leaving visible marks, making it difficult for the target person to defend themselves or even identify the emotional abuse. Hypersensitivity is also a prominent characteristic. Any feedback, no matter how minor, is interpreted as a personal attack. They may react with intense anger or extreme victimization, accusing the other person of lacking empathy. This heightened sensitivity creates an environment where any attempt at honest communication is seen as a threat. These behaviors form a clear pattern, but they often go unnoticed because they are disguised as vulnerability. The key to understanding covert narcissism lies in observing the nuances of these interactions and recognizing that behind the facade of fragility, there is a deep sense of entitlement and manipulation. Understanding these characteristics helps explain why relationships with covert narcissists can be so exhausting. Whether in family, professional, or social contexts, these repetitive patterns deeply affect emotional dynamics. Now let's explore the 7 signs that expose a covert narcissist. Sign 1. Constant victimhood. One of the most striking traits of the covert narcissist is their chronic tendency to portray themselves as a victim. They seem to believe that the entire world conspires against them, and any setback or failure is always someone else's fault, never theirs. This victim mentality is a powerful tool of emotional manipulation, as it shifts responsibility away from their own mistakes while evoking feelings of pity or guilt in those around them. For example, imagine a work project didn't go as expected. While most people would acknowledge their share of responsibility or seek solutions, the covert narcissist immediately points fingers. "I knew this was going to happen," they'll say. "Everyone got in my way. No one gave me the right tools to do my job." This narrative not only absolves the narcissist of any responsibility, but also creates a dynamic where others are made to feel guilty for something they didn't cause. This pattern extends beyond the professional environment. In personal relationships, the covert narcissist may constantly blame their partner for any problems that arise. If there are financial difficulties in the family, they might say something like, "If you had been more careful with money, we wouldn't be in this situation." Comments like these plant seeds of doubt and insecurity in the other person, fueling the cycle of emotional control. The impact of this constant victimization is devastating. Those close to the covert narcissist begin to internalize this guilt, questioning their own actions and even their self-esteem. Gradually, the target person finds themselves trapped in an exhausting cycle of trying to fix something that, in reality, has no solution, because the problem isn't in the external world, but in how the narcissist views themselves and others. This dynamic of victimization not only drains emotional energy, but also makes it difficult for the person to realize just how toxic this behavior really is. The next sign reveals another layer of this complex personality. Sign 2. Disguised grandiosity. Behind the facade of insecurity and self-pity of the covert narcissist lies a disguised grandiosity. This characteristic is subtle, but deeply corrosive, as it manifests indirectly, almost like inverted pride. They don't openly display their superiority, as classic narcissists do, but express it through statements that minimize others while hinting at their own worth. For example, instead of directly stating, "I am amazing," the covert narcissist might say something like, "I could have been the best in my field, but no one ever gave me a chance." Or, "This task is so simple it's almost a waste of my time." These phrases reveal an exaggerated sense of entitlement and personal importance, even if masked by apparent humility or frustration. Another common form of disguised grandiosity is the constant disqualification of others' efforts. The covert narcissist tends to believe their abilities are unmatched, and therefore rejects anything that doesn't align with their idealized vision of themselves. If someone shares an accomplishment, they might respond with sarcasm or indifference. "Oh, interesting, but do you really think that's something so special?" This kind of comment not only devalues the other person, but also serves to elevate their own position, albeit indirectly. This dynamic creates a toxic cycle where the target person begins to question their own achievements and competencies. Gradually, the victim's self-esteem is eroded, while the covert narcissist maintains their narrative of superiority untouched. Additionally, this disguised grandiosity often prevents them from recognizing their own flaws or limitations, perpetuating the cycle of resentment and frustration. This pattern of behavior is one of the reasons why relationships with covert narcissists can be so draining. The next characteristic we will explore is even more common and equally harmful. Sign 3. Constant criticism. One of the most exhausting behaviors of the covert narcissist is their tendency to criticize everything and everyone around them. These criticisms are not constructive, but rather a way to disqualify others and reinforce their distorted perception of superiority. To them, the world is full of flaws, and it's their job to point them out, even if it causes discomfort or demotivates those around them. For example, imagine someone sharing an accomplishment at work, like a promotion or a successful project. Instead of congratulating or acknowledging the effort, the covert narcissist might say something like, "That promotion doesn't mean anything. Anyone could have gotten it." Or, "Do you really think this is going to change anything in your career?" Comments like these not only devalue the person but also reinforce the narrative that the narcissist knows more or deserves more than others. This pattern of constant criticism extends to trivial areas of daily life. They might complain about the food at a restaurant, the quality of a movie, or even the weather. Nothing seems good enough to meet their unrealistic expectations. This behavior creates an emotionally heavy environment, where those around them begin to question their own choices and abilities. Additionally, the covert narcissist often criticizes indirectly, using sarcasm or veiled remarks. For instance, instead of directly saying they didn't like something, they might make comments like, "It must be nice to have so much free time to worry about little things." This passive-aggressive approach makes it difficult for the target person to confront the behavior, as the narcissist can deny any malicious intent. The impact of these criticisms is profound. Gradually, the target person begins to internalize these negative messages, leading to an erosion of self-esteem and a constant feeling of inadequacy. This destructive pattern is just one of the many ways the covert narcissist exerts emotional control, feeding their own need for validation while undermining others' confidence. This cycle of constant criticism sets the stage for another defining trait. As a reminder, in the description of this video, you'll find a link to complementary content that can help you regain your inner peace, strengthen your mind, and learn even more about narcissism. Sign 4. Passive aggressiveness. Passive aggressiveness is one of the most insidious tools used by the covert narcissist to control and manipulate others. While the classic narcissist tends to be direct in their criticisms or attacks, the covert narcissist acts indirectly, leaving their victims confused about what exactly happened. This subtle yet corrosive behavior creates an emotionally toxic environment where the target person feels like they're always walking on eggshells. For example, imagine you planned a social event and invited the covert narcissist to attend. Instead of declining directly or openly expressing their dissatisfaction, they might say something like, it must be nice to have so many friends. It must be great not to feel lonely." This seemingly harmless phrase carries a heavy emotional load, full of sarcasm and veiled criticism. The goal is to make you question your own choices or even feel guilty for something you didn't do wrong. Another common example occurs in professional relationships. If a colleague receives a promotion, the covert narcissist might comment, "Looks like you just have to be in the right place at the right time, huh? You don't really have to work hard." These comments not only devalue others' accomplishments, but also reinforce the narcissist's internal narrative that the world is unfair and others don't deserve what they have. The problem with this type of behavior is that it's hard to confront. When questioned, the covert narcissist can deny any malicious intent, saying something like, "I was just joking," or "You're taking everything personally." This denial makes it even harder for the target person to set clear boundaries or defend themselves against these emotional attacks. This dynamic of passive aggressiveness is exhausting because it creates a continuous cycle of uncertainty and self-doubt. The target person begins to wonder if they're interpreting the situation correctly or if they're being overly sensitive. This pattern undermines confidence and self-esteem, paving the way for another defining trait of the covert narcissist. Sign 5. Hypersensitivity to criticism. Hypersensitivity to criticism is a defining characteristic of the covert narcissist, revealing their emotional fragility disguised as superiority. Any type of feedback, even when offered with good intentions, is perceived as a direct personal attack. This disproportionate reaction not only discourages any attempt at honest dialogue, but also serves to maintain emotional control over others. For example, imagine you're trying to give constructive advice to the covert narcissist, something simple like, "Maybe it would be interesting to organize your commitments better." Instead of considering the suggestion, they might react with anger or extreme victimization. "You're always criticizing me. Don't you see I'm doing the best I can? Why do you treat me this way?" This response pattern transforms any observation into an accusation, putting the target person on the defensive and generating guilt for having brought up the issue. This hypersensitivity also manifests in everyday situations. On social media, for instance, the covert narcissist may interpret a neutral or even positive comment as an indirect jab. Someone saying, "I loved your post," might be met with suspicion. "What did you mean by that? Are you being sarcastic?" This constant paranoia reflects their distorted view that the world is against them, further fueling their victim narrative. Moreover, this exaggerated reaction to criticism prevents any possibility of personal growth. The covert narcissist not only rejects feedback, but also uses their sensitivity as a weapon to silence others. They might resort to phrases like, "You should be on my side, not criticizing me," or "I knew I couldn't trust you." This behavior creates a toxic cycle where those around them begin to avoid any confrontation, fearing the emotional consequences. This dynamic destroys healthy communication and pushes the covert narcissist even further away from any chance of self-understanding or improvement. Sign 6. Social isolation. Social isolation is one of the most insidious strategies used by the covert narcissist to maintain control over their victims. They not only devalue the target person's social interactions, but also create an environment of guilt and discredit that makes these connections emotionally costly. This behavior gradually distances the victim from friends, family, and social groups, leaving them increasingly dependent on the narcissist. For example, imagine you're excited to attend an event with friends. The covert narcissist might respond with sarcasm or indifference. "It must be nice to have so much free time to go out with people who don't even care about you," or "I guess you prefer their company to mine, since you never have time for us." These comments plant doubts in the target person's mind, making them question the value of their external relationships. Additionally, the covert narcissist often criticizes the target person's friends or family, labeling them as superficial, selfish, or inadequate. They might say something like, "Do you really trust them? It seems like they just want to take advantage of you." This type of manipulation not only distances the victim from their support network, but also makes them feel that the narcissist is the only person they can truly trust. When the target person finally decides to include the narcissist in social events, in an attempt to calm them down or avoid conflict, the experience is usually disastrous. The covert narcissist tends to act hostilely, making derogatory comments about the other guests, or simply isolating themselves in a corner, radiating discomfort. This behavior creates a vicious cycle. The target person gradually abandons their own social connections to avoid the stress caused by the narcissist's presence. This process of isolation happens so gradually that it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. The victim realizes, at some point, that their social life has been drastically reduced and that the only remaining link is the narcissist themselves. This dynamic sets the stage for the next sign. Sign 7. Manipulation through guilt. Manipulation through guilt is one of the most powerful weapons of the covert narcissist, used to maintain emotional control and ensure that the target person remains at the disposal of their needs. They are masters at exploiting sad stories, past traumas, or perceived injustices to justify their toxic behaviors and avoid taking responsibility for their actions. This pattern not only diverts attention from their flaws, but also makes the victim feel guilty for questioning or confronting them. For example, imagine you're trying to set boundaries with the covert narcissist, perhaps saying something like, "I need some time for myself." Instead of respecting your decision, they might respond with phrases like, "After everything I've been through in life, you still want to abandon me? I always thought you were different from the others." This response not only evokes feelings of guilt, but also reinforces the narrative that they are constant victims, incapable of receiving support or understanding. Another common example is the use of difficult past experiences, real or exaggerated, to manipulate the target person. The covert narcissist may share stories of abandonment, neglect, or trauma from their childhood, often early in the relationship. While this may initially generate empathy, over time, these stories become tools of control. Phrases like, "You know how much I've suffered in life. Why can't you be more understanding?" are used to disqualify the needs and emotions of the other person. This dynamic creates a vicious cycle where the target person feels selfish for putting their own needs first. They begin to invest more and more energy into trying to save or help the narcissist, even if it results in emotional exhaustion. This guilt-based manipulation is especially effective because it directly targets the victim's sense of empathy and responsibility, making it even harder to break the cycle. This revealing pattern leads us to reflect on how to identify and deal with the covert narcissist, a crucial topic for protecting emotional health and establishing healthy boundaries. Additionally, identifying a covert narcissist can be challenging, especially since their behaviors are subtle and often masked by an apparent vulnerability. However, by observing consistent patterns in their actions and words, it's possible to recognize the signs before the relationship becomes emotionally draining. The first step is paying attention to how they react to criticism or suggestions. If any feedback, even well-intentioned, is met with anger, victimization, or personal attacks, this may be a strong indication of the hypersensitivity typical of covert narcissists. Another telling sign is their tendency to always portray themselves as victims, even in situations where they clearly are not. They may constantly blame the world, other people, or external circumstances for their failures, while minimizing the efforts and achievements of others. This distorted pattern of thinking creates a cycle where they absolve themselves of responsibility and project guilt onto others. Additionally, observe how they handle their social networks and relationships. If you notice that you're gradually distancing yourself from friends, family, or social groups to avoid conflicts caused by their behavior, this may be a clear sign of manipulation and social isolation. Dealing with a covert narcissist requires firmness and clear boundaries. The first strategy is to avoid giving in to guilt-based manipulation. When they try to evoke feelings of pity or unjust responsibility, it's essential to remain emotionally distant and remember that their actions and words are reflections of their own insecurities, not your reality. Setting firm boundaries is also crucial. This may include saying no to irrational demands, interrupting toxic conversations when they arise, and, if necessary, seeking external support, whether from trusted friends or a mental health professional. Seeking external support is especially important because the covert narcissist tends to create a distorted narrative of reality, making the target person doubt their own perceptions. Having someone outside the situation provide an objective perspective can help clarify your thoughts and strengthen confidence in your decisions. In more severe cases, where the relationship has become emotionally abusive, it may be necessary to consider complete separation. While this may seem difficult, especially if there's an emotional or shared history, remember that your emotional health must be prioritized. When dealing with a covert narcissist, it's essential to recognize that the problem isn't with you, but with how that person handles their own vulnerabilities. Understanding this can be liberating and create space for a more emotionally healthy life. The next step is to reflect on why we get trapped in these relationships and how we can break the cycle. Now, why do we get stuck in these relationships? Getting stuck in a relationship with a covert narcissist is more common than one might think, and it happens due to a combination of emotional and psychological factors. At the beginning, these individuals often elicit feelings of empathy and compassion. They may present life stories marked by abandonment, neglect, or trauma, creating the illusion that they are helpless victims of the world. This narrative can be especially appealing to those with a strong sense of empathy or a desire to help others. For example, when you first meet a covert narcissist, you may feel like you're in the presence of someone who has never had a fair chance in life. They might say things like, "No one ever believed in me," or "I could have been someone if people hadn't undervalued me." This initial perception makes you feel motivated to rescue them, fostering the belief that your presence can make a difference. This rescue cycle, where you invest time, energy, and even resources to help them, generates a temporary sense of purpose, as if you're fixing something broken. However, this dynamic quickly turns into an emotional trap. The covert narcissist rarely changes or acknowledges the impact of their own behaviors. Even if you support them repeatedly, they will find new ways to blame the world, or even you, for their problems. Gradually, you begin to realize that your attempts to help are futile, but the guilt of abandoning them becomes a heavy burden to carry. This emotional ambiguity creates a kind of dependency. You find yourself torn between the frustration caused by their toxic behaviors and the desire to keep trying to save them. This internal conflict makes it harder to break away, perpetuating the cycle of emotional exhaustion. The next step is to reflect on how to break free from this pattern and protect your mental health effectively. In this video, we explored the 7 signs of a covert narcissist: constant victimhood, disguised grandiosity, incessant criticism, passive aggressiveness, hypersensitivity to criticism, social isolation, and manipulation through guilt, forming a clear pattern that can be identified with attention and self-awareness. Recognizing these behaviors is the first step toward protecting your emotional health and setting healthy boundaries. By understanding how these dynamics work, you gain clarity about the relationships that may be draining your energy and harming your well-being. Remember, your emotional energy is valuable and should be preserved. Set firm boundaries, seek external support, and don't be afraid to prioritize your peace of mind, even if it means distancing yourself from toxic people. If this video shed light on situations you've experienced or are currently experiencing, share your story in the comments. Your experience may help others recognize similar patterns and seek the necessary changes. If this video made sense to you, know that there's a link in the description with support materials prepared with great care to help you understand what you've been through, rebuild your self-esteem, and move forward with greater lightness. Remember, you are light. Never forget to shine.